Ready? Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here today for what I'm sure is going to be a very insightful conversation around one of the most pressing topics of our time, climate change. But most importantly, the way we talk about it. So climate journalism has this huge potential to bridge the gap between science and the public, but somehow we are not really hitting the mark. Let's be honest, how many of us here scroll past articles that have to do with this topic, or we tune out when the conversation is about climate change? So several studies shows that many of us are doing this, and it's not really because we don't care. It's because the stories are often too complex, too overwhelming, and really too removed from our daily lives. So how do we turn this around? This is the topic we bring you today, and how will we transform climate science from something that is abstract into stories that people not only understand, but feel in their bones, stories that are compelling to us, that engage us and make us act ultimately as well. So we've brought together a great group of storytellers who have found ways to cut through the noise and really connect with audiences. And they all have different experiences in the media. So Ingrid is an award-winning freelance investigative journalist based in the Netherlands. She covers trade, politics, and environmental crime stories, and has contributed to and reported to for media outlets in more than 15 countries. Joy is an Emmy-nominated producer and journalist who explores the intersections between environment, climate, and social equality. At Earthrise Studio, Joy is committed to championing diverse perspectives and tools in climate storytelling. And Kio is a climate reporter and editor at Germany's international broadcaster, Deutsche Welle, and she launched Planet A, an award-winning YouTube channel focused on climate change, which has now expanded to TikTok. So Ingrid is gonna, sorry about that, not just yet. Ingrid is gonna bring us the perspective of a freelance journalist that might resonate with many of you in the audience. Joy has this unique experience of working at a creative multimedia studio, and she collaborates a lot with NGOs and media outlets. And finally, Kio works, she'll share the perspective of a climate journalist and editor who works with a team at a big European newsroom, right? And now, yes. So I want to tell you how I met them. I met them at the European Journalism Center because we roll out initiatives that support journalists and media outlets across Europe that are trying precisely to create stories that bridge the gap between science and the public through climate journalism. And we really believe this is one of the most important ways to reshape the climate narrative, helping us, people, media, policymakers, governments, confront massive challenges like wildfires, droughts, and climate justice in a way that resonates with audiences. So we, at the European Journalism Center, we do this through grants and fellowships like the one you can see on the screen. This one is open for applications. If any one of you would like to apply. We run accelerator programs. Also, we also recognize climate journalism, innovative climate journalism, and we organize events that provide networking opportunities for journalists to discuss climate journalism and how to elevate their stories. This one is an example. It's going to happen on October 10 in Copenhagen, and it's free to register and attend if you have the opportunity. So, through these initiatives, we have seen how collaborations between journalists and NGOs and new storytelling techniques can truly grab the attention and increase the impact of our work as journalists. The goal today is not just to talk about the challenges, but also to talk about solutions. So let's dive into it, and we will start with Ingrid, who has worked with some colleagues to design a role-playing game on based on the methodology of environmental investigations. And the purpose of this experiment was for people to experience the work of investigative climate journalists during an interactive workshop at a conference like this.
Thank you, Vera. It's a bit meta to be talking about a conference on a conference, but I'm going to give it a go. So we started our investigation in Bosnia. You can see the forest back here. And really looked at how the political elite uses corrupted and fraudulent wood tenders to enrich themselves. This is a photo of us. I worked with 4 colleagues from Bosnia and from the Netherlands on this project. This is a photo of us in the field. For months, this was what we were doing. It's a catchy tune. We had a lot of fun. And it was also a lot of hard work. This is us getting stuck in the mud somewhere. In the snow, sorry. Well, but I'm not really going to tell you about my investigation. You can read it. I can tell you all about it many, many times. But we're going to focus on the impact of it. So it was an investigation of nearly 6 months, in which we gathered a lot of documentation, satellite images, a bunch of boring papers, did a bunch of interviews, and published across European media. But then the question was, okay, you've published all of this, what now? And we were challenged by Anna Koens from Journalism Fund Europe. She's the impact manager of the Earth Investigation program. Hope you forgive me for that. And she had an idea. She said, why don't you take your investigation and make a game out of it? And so we did that for the International Anti-Corruption Conference in Vilnius. We took Dungeons and Dragons as our inspiration. I don't know if anyone knows it here. Okay, I see faces nodding, good. So on the basis of our investigation, we designed fictional characters. We made envelopes full of evidence based on our investigations and divided the room of participants like yourselves in groups and asked them to pretend to be us or pretend to be the villains of our story. We did this in partnership with a range of agencies like Pulitzer Center, Global Witness, SIN, and the Global Investigative Journalism Network. So we got really nerdy on this. I'll show you a little clip of it.
We ask you to close your eyes and pay close attention to what you hear.
Honorable knights and peace warriors, noble gifted cavaliers, guardians of this earth, you are here to be the truth bearers.
Welcome to the secret meeting on the banks of the Neris River and its beautiful trees. You are now on a journey of the Anti-Corruption Fellowship.
Open your ears and listen not to a tale, but a true story of destruction and greed. Once these green kingdoms, prosperous and free, are now threatened by money and compulsion, fire, death, deforestation, and corruption.
Afraid and dismayed.
I will leave the rest for you, but we got really creative. We also really got creative in the images. This is part of, we basically took 2 investigations, my investigation in Bosnia and the investigation of a colleague, Lily Mendoza from Brazil, in the rainforest, and made nice characters, printed cards. This is Lily's part. On the left is a corrupt wood trucker and a data scientist. People were able to play it. And then they had 45 minutes to play the game and then had to present back to us, to a council of supreme investigators. This is one of the
Was
participants.
involved, we request for you to prolong our investigation because we do feel that there is something way more serious at hand, even though what we do have is already a pretty major situation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
This is Lily cheering for our investigation being successful and her team solving the crime. So with all of this, I just want to say, a very boring, technical, data-driven investigation can be made fun at the end. And we felt that through making it into a game, rather than into something else, we actually were able to engage with policymakers in a different way. I mean, it's always fun to see very senior prosecutors playing villains whilst they're running around the room. So for us, it's an example of how you can potentially share investigative journalism in a different way. Thank you. Over to you, Vera.
Thanks, Ingrid. So, as you could see, this was a really interesting experiment. There are other journalists and newsrooms taking their investigations outside the platforms, right? Because, of course, Ingrid's investigation was published online, it's available online, but this takes journalism out of the platform, and some people call it live journalism. Why do you think, Ingrid, this is a good way to reach a broader audience and eventually policymakers? You have the comment here of somebody from the World Bank. Why is this so important?
I think it's a really nice way to be able to share your investigation in a sense with policymakers in a way that they actually can engage with it rather than having it online. It makes it come to life more, and they also understand more what we as investigative journalists do by being so practical. But I think there are 1,000 ways, and I would encourage all journalists to really try and be creative and make it fun. And why not? You already did all the work. It's online, it's in the newspaper, like you can share it so many different ways. Yeah.
Thanks so much for sharing. Please keep your questions for the end. There will be time for that, okay? And now we're gonna follow with Joy.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Joy Lee. I'm the head of editorial at Earthrise. I just want to do a quick litmus test. Has anyone here heard of Earthrise Studio before? Okay. Not as tough a crowd as I thought it would be. Let me walk you through what we do and our do's and don'ts and what we've learned about climate storytelling. So we are a media platform that focuses specifically on how to communicate the climate crisis to a global young audience through digital social-first content. We started in 2020. I'm sure you guys all remember this period of time. It was a time of great social strife. We had the pandemic, different social movements happening around the world, like Black Lives Matter, and raging wildfires in almost every corner of the earth. And I think we saw a huge shift towards social media as a forum of discussion for all the converging crises that we were seeing unfolding in front of us. So we kind of rose and started the platform during that time to provide a space for young people to be able to talk about these issues through the climate lens. And so leveraging social media, this has been very, very important to what we do. So anything from the very short form social digital content to larger digital video series. But of course, you know, in a time where the attention economy is so strife, we also are trying to bridge the social content with also longer form documentaries and feature films in order to deepen some of the conversations that we're facilitating. We've reached over 50 million people organically over the last 4 years. We've platformed over 100 storytellers, policy leaders, activists, journalists, etc. And we have a community of about 2.5 million people. We call them the climate curious across all of our different channels. Our audience is 3/4 female, and primarily also around 3/4 aged 18 through 35. Spread over 45 different countries, but primarily in majority English-speaking countries. One of the things that we try to do is to make sure that we bridge the conversation from the top rungs of political power. So we've done interviews with figures like Barack Obama, all the way down to kind of grassroots community leaders and activists. And that's just a bit of a primer of who we are, but I also kind of wanted to talk a little bit through why do we focus on climate storytelling, and what are the things that we've learned, the challenges that we face, but also the opportunities that we see. I always start with this quote called, "Climate change is the biggest story journalism has never successfully told. It is one of the biggest existential crises of our time," and I'm sure many of you guys have felt that the way that we've told the stories and who's telling them and how we tell them haven't been working. So how do we move the needle forward? If you Google climate change on your phones, I did this about a week or 2 weeks ago, and if you look at the images, I think this is also emblematic of some of the issues and challenges that we face, and this is also backed by a lot of research in the climate communication space of the main challenges that we face, one of which it often feels abstract. I mean, there's some CGI, like AI-generated images here. It feels far away. There aren't humans within the pictures. It feels very decentralized and unpersonal. And it's also rife with scientific jargon, which might feel inaccessible to the everyday person. And beyond that, by some counts, and of course this is also quite difficult to quantify, but one study showed that up to 98% of environmental stories are told with a negative frame, which of course will have repercussions on the audiences who are reading these stories. It's no wonder that another study that looked at 10,000 young people around the world on their attitudes towards climate change found that over half of them say that humanity is doomed. Also, 3/4 of them think that the future is frightening, and part of that is the overwhelm with the scale of the issue, but also because people feel alone when it comes to grappling with the climate crisis. But what's also really interesting to know is that things have changed quite drastically over the last few years. Global concern for climate change is at an all-time high. It's no longer about trying to convince people that climate change is real. It's now about pointing them towards the solutions. This past summer, a few months ago, the biggest survey on public opinion around climate change was just released. And it showed that 80% of people globally want stronger climate action by the government. So people do want to see change when it comes to climate. But there is a perception gap. Most people don't realize and consistently underestimate how much other people also care about the climate. One study showed in the US in particular, 80 to 90% of Americans underestimated support for climate policies. They would think that just about 1/3 or a little over 1/3 of other Americans were supporters, but the reality was much higher, it's about 2/3. And I think in the media that represents quite a big opportunity to address this perception gap and bring new audiences into the conversation. So what we've seen as challenges is there's not enough climate stories that is able to be accessible and relatable to a global young audience. Too much of it is framed about the problems and the negativity and death and urgency framing. And that inevitably leads to a feeling of lack of empowerment and disempowerment with the stories that we tell, which then leads to disengagement from the stories and news avoidance and things that I'm sure that you guys are all quite familiar with. So how do we move beyond this? I'm just going to walk you very quickly. I have a crazy amount of slides for a short period of time. So I'm going to go through just a few of the case studies and a few of the pointers. So how do we tell these stories? How do we first target the heart and then the mind? Stories that speak to people's lives and are relatable. What do people care about? And how do we tell it from different angles? Well, personal health is a huge topic that people feel very passionately about. So how do we tell stories from that lens? Is wildfire smoke a silent killer? That's part of a series that we did with BBC's Natural History Unit on the links between public health and climate change. How do we access pop culture? How do we talk about what the entertainment industry, like Hollywood, what are they doing in the climate space? How do we talk about politics? 4 billion people were eligible to vote in elections this year. How do we tap into that conversation? So continuously finding different angles to bring people into the climate conversation, but angles that people are already passionate about. And it's not just about a diversity of climate stories, it's also about how do we make sure that we're working with a diversity of storytellers. When you're in the climate space, something that you might hear quite a bit is that There is a portion of the world that faces the brunt of the climate impacts, mostly within the global south, but they're also deeply underrepresented within media. How do we make sure that we're working with different journalists and storytellers from these areas that are most impacted? So telling stories from and about different communities. One of my colleagues is a Colombian presenter, and we've trialed some Spanish language content that focuses on Latin America, and that stuff has performed quite well. You know, we've done a lot of collaborations. The upper right corner is with a Brazilian indigenous community, and we collaborated with an indigenous media company and storytelling network there to do this. And how do you speak about different things like faith and use also that as a hook to talk about climate? Solutions framing. Now, I don't say this to mean that we ignore the problems and only focus on the solutions. There's a delicate balance and a delicate dance. But definitely celebrate the wins where there are, because too much of the stories that we see are about the devastating fires, the floods, and the kind of existential doom that we typically see. We did a series with Bloomberg called Spotlight, and this was a 12-part series looking each at a different solutions per episode. So we looked at the electric vehicle revolution across the world. We looked at what a just transition might look like as we phase out fossil fuels and into clean energy sources. We looked at legal frameworks like the rights of nature. And some of the key takeaways that we learned is definitely don't focus just on technocratic solutions. Look at both local and global solutions and make sure you're spotlighting community power. Which brings me to my next point, empowerment and community. We do a lot of collaborations with different organizations and communities around the world who are actively working on small-scale but also large-scale solutions. A few examples are here, but namely the case study that I just want to briefly point out is, you know, over the last 3 years, we've been working with Minister, she's now a minister, the extraordinary rise to power of Brazil's first ever Minister of Indigenous Peoples, Sonia Guajajara. And she's brought an entire collective also of indigenous women with her as she, you know, gained a seat in the corridors of power and brought an entire group of people with her. And what we've learned also, of course, in that process, I mean, we're working very closely with a Brazilian team on the ground, but this has been over 3 years. Of course, you know, beyond just the social media, short-form digital content, how do you build long-term relationships and trust, and also carve out the space to go more in depth into the stories that you're doing. And it's not just also about showing the solutions that they have, but really also interrogating the nuances of the struggles that communities go through, and show how different paths can lead to systemic change. And I think that's it.
You can follow the work of Earthrise on Instagram, and you'll be able to see how they blend data with the topic, what is the tone of their publications. And I have a question, Joy, because at Earthrise, you have worked with the BBC, you have worked with Oxfam, so there is this collaboration between journalists and NGOs that we know can increase the impact of the work, but sometimes journalists look down upon this way of working, right? Because they don't want to be perceived as doing advocacy. So how do you balance this?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, and I think there's a lot of, you know, internal dialogue within the journalism space, right, depending on the issues that we're facing. Climate change is a deeply existential and global challenge that we're facing. I do feel that there is a responsibility within media to spotlight the different courses of action that are being taken, because we do need to have some kind of collective consensus of pushing for systemic change when it comes to addressing the climate crisis. But the interesting thing about climate is that it is deeply intersectional. You can talk about climate through an energy perspective, through a personal health perspective, or a public health perspective. You can talk about air pollution. You can talk about, you know, the different economic models that we're seeing in different countries. There's so many different points of entry that I think when we look at the collaborations that we've done with NGOs, you know, of course, different NGOs, you're going to have a different audience. But with climate, you can always find that middle intersecting, in the Venn diagram, the middle intersecting issue where I can match, here's where our audience also cares about the same thing that your audience cares about. So with Oxfam, which is a global NGO that focuses a lot on poverty inequality is also deeply intersecting with climate. So what we did is a 5-part series, kind of breaking down how that is the case. And what that served was for an Oxfam audience who cares about social issues but might not know about climate, they got to have a little bit more insight into what that looks like. And for our audience, who might care about the climate, but is maybe not as teed up on topics like gender equality or race and classism, they also gain something new from that. So I think it's also about leveraging the different types of expertise that we might have and the different interests that our audience have, and finding that middle ground so that we can collectively, I guess, educate our audiences in different directions.
Thank you. So we've brought you 2 proposals already, live journalism and collaborations between journalists and NGOs. And now we're going to hear from Kyo and the experience at Planet A.
Hi, so I'm Kyo Dara. I'm the head of Planet A, which is a YouTube channel and a TikTok channel, and it focuses on climate and environmental issues. So we're about a team of 25 people total, I think, and we just almost reached 650K subscribers. We also launched in 2020, also in the chaos. And yeah, on TikTok, I think we're 80+ K. We launched later. I have a quick, DW, Germany's international broadcaster. And this is a quick trailer.
We're in a bit of a pickle.
The world's worst traffic.
This village torn down for coal.
Massive plastics problem. How do we get out?
These leafy greens grow in symbiosis with fish.
You're seeing climate action in action.
Recycle the unrecyclable.
We look closer.
We took a dive into this fast fashion phenomenon.
We looked through hundreds of company records.
Break it down.
This is water splitting up into hydrogen and oxygen.
Let's give it a try.
And voila, you can make electricity.
Subscribe and come along with us to find out how to get out of this mess.
Okay, that was really loud, sorry. But as you may have noticed, so we have kind of the problem, and then we offer quite quickly the solution. And that is what we really do focus on. I can talk a little bit more about that later. But we kind of have, I would say, 3 different points how we try and engage audiences that usually are not that climate focused. Because I think we do get people that are interested in the climate. We do have a lot of people who are very, very engaged. But that's not necessarily the people that we only want to reach, right? We want to get people who are not maybe that interested, or who maybe just don't want to hear about climate in their free time. Who can blame them? We know all of that. Me, in my free time, I don't want to watch any of that. So how do we get people to watch it without really kind of hitting them in the face with the climate topic? So number 1, broaden. What I mean by this is broaden kind of your framing and broaden kind of also who you're talking to. What I say with this is, let's take an example of YouTube. You have a title and you have a thumbnail, right? I always, when a reporter comes to me, I'm also an editor there and myself a reporter, when a reporter comes to me with climate change in the title, with environment in the title, with sustainability in the title, I always scratch it out, because I feel like that, for us at least, narrows the audience. It then only speaks to people who are really interested in the topic. So I say, find somehow a way to make this title work and more sexy and more enticing without actually mentioning climate. I have a couple of examples. Number 1 is, we made a video with a title that's why banning cannabis was a huge mistake. And we actually talked about how hemp is environmentally friendly and how you can build things with that. But of course, we also got the people in through the story of cannabis and why it was actually outlawed. And also as a use for a material. We're not doing clickbait, but we're kind of like just towing the line in between, like, oh yeah, the title was still what this video was about, but we kind of also need the climate in there. We kind of reel people in through the back door. The other one was why the Himalayas have so many ghost villages. We also need to talk to the people that are there on the platform. On YouTube, I don't know, you've probably seen a lot of lost places videos and stuff. People like, you know, like abandoned places. So we did that also with the thumbnail, and it was actually about climate migration. How people from the Himalaya then move to the cities because it's not viable anymore agriculturally to work there. I have a few more recent examples. We also tap into kind of the language of YouTube. So Germany's hidden leaking nuclear waste dump, very pointed, but it's actually about the whole problem of nuclear waste storage and how Germany completely messed it up in the 60s and 70s. Insane. But it has the language and the look also. It doesn't say, hey, look at the environmental pollution that nuclear waste could bring. No, it's like hidden, secret, nuclear dump. The other one is here, why don't we just turn empty offices into housing? This is actually about how harmful construction is and concrete is and steel is and all of those things. It's a really boring topic though, talking about concrete and steel, and it's hard to really make people interested in it. So we actually talked about office conversions and tried to make it also more accessible. Yeah, and it's actually how bad the construction industry is. You wouldn't know though. Also picking up a question that a lot of people have, I think. If you look at city centers in Europe, it's also the same in the US, that, yeah, you ask yourself, why isn't this happening? So the next thing is breakdown. I think this is super important if we're specifically talking about scientific journalism and climate science, because it's really abstract, as you said, and really, really hard to talk about. I purposely, if I'm an editor, I don't look into the topic. So if people come to me and then they give me a storyboard and they basically have this explanation part, I have no context to it. And if I don't understand it, I say, write it again. And then they come, and I'm not that super scientifically minded. I just say, come again. I didn't get it. And in so many instances, they can tell me, really, like if they talk to me, they can tell me and make me understand, but they can't write it down as easily. So I say, make it as dumb as you possibly can, and to still say intelligent, but make it as dumb as you can. And on top of that, we also use a lot of experiments. This is really interesting because with the broaden kind of the first topic, I would say this is how you reel people in. How do you make people click on your story? That's the first thing. The second thing is, how do you keep people there? And that's the breakdown and the personalized angle. We see two basically retention, you know, when you look at basically when do people jump off your video, when do they stay? One of the times that they really do stay is infographics and things like this.
Salt water, here colored in red for clarity, is pressed through a membrane that is only partially permeable.
Building a floating wind turbine seems to be very complex. We have achieved floating!
It's called gravity energy storage, or gravity battery.
This mechanical energy is then turned into electrical energy.
Yeah, super simple, but this is literally what keeps people watching. You can really see how the retention curve just stays there the way it is. It's not groundbreaking, but I think that it's super important when we are reporters and we're in this topic, we feel like we understand and we feel like we can use technical words because we forgot the time that we actually didn't know about it. So this is really important. The third thing actually, is personalize. I mean this also in two ways. So number one is, as Joy said, for example, how do you make it relatable to people? How do you relate to the everyday of the people? It's getting sadly more and more easy to do this because we are all affected by the climate crisis. The thing though is that with personalized, we do that. For example, with the housing one, your next home, ? It could be if you live in a city. The second thing that we do is we have a lot of dry topics where it's like, we were talking about this about peatlands, for example. Super boring to show. Or like carbon taxes, super hard kind of to, make somehow tangible to people. So what we do is we do a lot of also people in front of the camera. We do that with TikTok, we do that with YouTube a lot, that we have people that are reporters, that are on the ground, and that kind of also visualize what we mean by the story. And I can show you this here.
We're out here looking for feral hogs, animals that cause tons of ecological and economic damage.
I think that's beyond next level. I want to show you how to heat entire neighborhoods with water as cold as this.
It feels really strange, though, to be this close to this much nuclear waste.
This is the first certified plane to fly electric in the world.
Oh my god, it's really fast!
Yeah, so how do you make it entertaining, and how do you kind of make it tangible to people? And that's one way how we do it.
Thanks, Kio. So Kio has left you a challenge. Your next climate story, try to write the headline without the words climate or sustainability in it. I have a very quick question. So we open the floor here to the conversation, which is, of course, for YouTube, your stories are more or less 10 minutes long?
10, 15 minutes, yeah.
10 to 15 minutes. And for TikTok?
Ideally under 35 seconds.
Okay. Yeah. So how do you balance the urgency of telling news about something that is clearly an issue, like climate change, right? Climate issues, but also offer the solutions perspective?
Yeah, that's something that's really hard. I think what we can do well in a way is we don't have to have the urgency of a daily newsroom. We don't have to report necessarily on every wildfire. I would say, as a rule of thumb, we never report on a story without offering the solution. So and the amount to which, or like the percentage to which it is the solution, depends on how long has the story been going on. So the longer the story has been talked about, the more percentage basically of the story needs to be solutions. Or else you hear the same thing over and over and over again, and it disengages people. So if you talk about plastic, for example, it needs to be more about the solutions, let's say, than the problem. Everybody knows about the problem. If it's something that's really new, you can do something when 90% is a problem, but you need that 10% at the end. And also one thing that I wanted to add is, if you have solutions, you need to put them into context. Like, how much is this actually going to change something? Can it scale? Can it scope? As in, like, can you actually make this into something that's viable? Because I feel like in the beginning there was this urgency, like everything's really bad, as you said, 98% bad coverage. Then there was this whole thing where we're like, we need to talk about solutions. Every single solution counts, which is important. But then we kind of lost, the balance. We need to show how actually viable the solutions are to the people and give context.
Thank you. So you can help me with the clicker, please, Kio? We actually prepared something of an interactive moment, but it's not going to happen because I'm sure there are questions in the audience, and so I see that we have about 12 minutes. So we'll just leave this one with you. This one, so that you can do as homework. So think about what would be the best way to keep your audiences engaged. And that font is really tiny, so maybe matching each climate story, disaster story, with some solutions perspective, using more multimedia or interactive storytelling approaches, or teaming up, for example, with influencers on social media, right? And these are all questions. They may not all apply to your work as a freelancer or your work in a newsroom, right? So it's something to think about. And let's move on to questions then. Miriam, you have a question, I see. Can we get a microphone over here, please?
Thank you. That was all really inspiring. Question for two different questions, one for you and one for you two. I've forgotten your name, sorry. The game is so inspiring. I love it. This is exactly totally in my bag. I was really, it was so cool to see. I was just wondering whether, just as, well, I've got loads of questions. I have to speak to you after, but just one short question. Like, was there plans to kind of take that beyond the realms of the conference? Like, this just seems like such a valuable format that you've spent a lot of time working on. Like, you could be taking that story, that game, kind of out on the road to the mass general public. So I was wondering whether that's something you're going to do or whether you have thought about doing that. And then I definitely want to talk to you more about like how you developed it, because it feels, a lot of resource and a lot of them, required to sort of produce something of that kind of creative scale. And And then a question for Earthrise and Planet A. I was just curious as to how you're defining like the impact of your work. Is it just purely, is it reach and kind of engagement online, or are there other ways in which you're kind of defining and the impact of the journalism in the real world? Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, we have been asked by some international agencies to do the same game in conferences, but to me it would be awesome if we could make a real game out of it that people could play to understand what investigative journalism would be. We have all been super busy since Vilnius, so we haven't come up with a plan, but if there's funders who would like to talk, it'd be really awesome, or if other people want to do something like that, I think it would be great. Maybe for schools. Yeah.
Just very quickly on the impact point. We're actually going into the next 4 months and redefining our theory of change, which will help reorient our impact measurement framework. But some of the things that we've done, I mean, Earthrise does kind of toe the line between advocacy and journalism and reporting and storytelling. So impact will look different depending on the project that we're doing. We've done a storytelling campaign over the last 3 years to help resource and support indigenous community leaders in Brazil. That's raised, I think, over £350,000. We're also working on an impact campaign attached to the feature film that will hopefully be tied with a kind of storytelling caravan that goes into different communities and looks at how do we upskill different people when it comes to storytelling skill sets, as well as bring them closer to kind of political literacy. But yeah, it's something that, of course, I think everyone is trying to understand and work out what that means in terms of impact.
Yeah, God, we literally just talked about this over lunch and yesterday as well, because I think it's really hard, especially for us as an international broadcaster. I forgot to say our key audiences is the US and India, actually. So we do local stories, but it's really hard for us to also measure their impact on the ground. And that's why I would like to go more into like these communities, and I would like to do more also grassroots reporting. It's hard for us though, just because of how we're structured. And that's why for us, a lot of it is if we communicated it to our bosses, it's like, hey, we can get actually clicks and views and comments and engagement from climate journalism, which a lot of people did not think would ever happen. So that's kind of where we're at now. We need to expand that more.
And sorry, one last point to that. I think also it really depends on what communities or what story you're working on, because the needs will be so different according to every story. So in that way, I think the impact measurement also needs to be quite flexible.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. I thought that was really impressive, and the work you're doing is fantastic. I just wondered if you've seen a change in people's behavior as they deal with the kind of economic ramifications of the pandemic or the war in Ukraine, where their kind of personal situation changes and they have to worry about their finances, and whether that has an impact in terms of how much they're interested in the bigger kind of existential issues that come from climate change.
Who would like to take this?
That's a. We were given a grant by YouTube to do a 4-part series on the energy crisis. More specifically in the UK, and it was really interesting because that got a lot of traction and a lot of engagement from people who typically are not paying attention to climate, because of course when it comes to your livelihood, when it comes to the bills you have to pay, suddenly it feels extremely real, and it's hard to ignore the fact that it is an issue. But I don't have empirical data to say, oh, this rise in story was associated to an increase in engagement on climate, although that is something very interesting to interrogate. But I would intuitively say that we've seen spikes of engagement that way, but I just don't have the empirical data.
Yeah, same for us, I think, with the energy crisis, with basically the gas pipeline being stopped in Europe, which was a huge thing. And also there we got people who were usually not really interested in it. And I think that's kind of, sadly, also a lot of the climate change stories impact lower income households, also disproportionately the global south. So I feel like people are just like, hey, it's a luxury to care about the climate. No, it's not. and it's getting more and less and less so, just because you cannot ignore it anymore. So I feel like, sadly, we're going to start engaging audiences that usually are not really into the climate per se, because we have to, because the reality is there.
Thank you. And there's another question over there.
Okay, hi. Firstly, thank you so much for this talk. It's a kind of what I also work with. I come from Denmark, from a big a little startup called Really, where we produce short-form video journalism on TikTok for Danish youth, where we try to collaborate with young people from the global south to kind of bridge the gap between north and south. What I've realized is when we focus on gender issues, LGBTQ plus rights, and also climate issues, we find it very difficult to connect with the male young audience. And then I saw your number on the screen, Joy. So my question is kind of what do you do if you, I guess you do something to also kind of get that part of the population, because that's something I'm really struggling with in my media. So yeah.
Sports. It feels so reductive to say that. Sports is a massive new direction and space to be able to talk about climate, because so many sports are based on the natural outdoors, which of course are being changed by climate. So I think we're starting to see a little bit more engagement with any of the kind of sports content that we do. And I do think more and more sports-oriented people are getting into the climate conversation through that lens. But I don't have the answer because, 75% of our audience is female. Also, male talent is a really interesting space, because I've seen a lot of different celebrities, male celebrities, who have become more engaged in climate advocacy, and they have been bringing, I think, more male audiences into the space. But that's kind of beyond the journalism space.
I'm so curious how you get so many women. Yeah, because we have I think on YouTube it's 85% male, and on TikTok I think it's 60% male. So we really get too many men. Too many men, too. No, but seriously, I just I think maybe also because a lot of the topics we do can be technical and stuff, but I really want to hear, because I wouldn't say out of personal experience climate is a very, at least the way we do it, an overly female topic, and we need more women to engage with us. So
let's talk.
Yeah.
This is how it happens.
Yeah,
just
collaboration.
Quickly, do you think that has to do with the platform? You're more on YouTube, perhaps Earthrise more on Instagram.
Yeah, but even on TikTok, that is a predominantly female platform, we still have more men. But yeah, so if anybody else also know how to get women, please, because we have so many women on screen.
And we have time for one more question at the top. Yeah.
Hi. I was very surprised earlier. I would like to ask Zoe. I was very surprised earlier by the results, the image results from your query about climate change in Google Images. Do you have any idea why you don't get any positive, I don't know if you call it positive results, with real images, and you get only abstract and that kind of images that are not really related?
I don't know. Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sorry.
I couldn't hear very well.
Sorry. Those images were all abstract. Yeah. Do you have any idea why this happens?
I think it's because I think climate communication is a little bit behind the times in the sense that there's more evolution that needs to happen. What I mean by that is climate communication is often, because it's it comes from the research, and so much of it feels very scientific. I think that the representation of personal human-led stories is only something that we're seeing emerge in the last few years. But how do you visually represent climate change, right? It is about carbon emissions in the air, and that is visually very difficult to represent. And then the other images that come to mind are polar bears, I think because there was a massive campaign that was done 10, 15 years ago. And then the typical images that we always see, which is the cracked earth, the cracked, scorched earth, and wildfires, etc. I think it's just that we've become so used to these visual representations because there hasn't been enough climate reporting to reflect the different visuals of today's climate experience. But yeah, I don't know that I have a really good answer for that.
Thank you very much.
Well, this is the end of our session. I would like to thank you all for coming. Thank you, Kio, Joy, Ingrid. And you can follow their work online. Kio's work more and of Planet A is on YouTube and TikTok. For Joy's Instagram, another platform? Yeah. Just Instagram. And Ingrid, Twitter? Yes, because Ingrid is a freelancer. She publishes with many media outlets. And please follow the European Journalism Center as well. Here we are on several platforms because we offer opportunities and free resources for journalists. So I hope they're useful to carry your work. And feel free to come to us during the breaks also if you have other questions. Okay?
Thanks.
Thank you.